A man in a leather jacket and a dusty fedora watches the greatest swordsman in Cairo finish a 2-minute display of pure blade mastery, spinning steel, crowd backing away, the whole performance. And then, Indiana Jones reaches into his holster, pulls a revolver, fires once, and walks away. The audience laughed for 30 years. What they did not realize is that the gun in his hand was one of the most devastatingly effective man-stoppers ever issued to a military force on Earth. And the reason that swordsman never had a chance had nothing to do with the joke. Hi, my name is Chris, and this is Movie Guns. The scene nobody forgets. Let's set it up properly because most people remember the laugh and forget everything else. Steven Spielberg is shooting in Tunisia in 1981. Harrison Ford has dysentery. The production schedule calls for a long, elaborate fight sequence between Indy and a black-robed swordsman. Choreography rehearsed, cameras positioned. The whole operation ready to roll, and Ford, sweating through his costume and running on fumes, turns to Spielberg and says something along the lines of, "Can I just shoot him?" Spielberg said yes. They shot one take. The swordsman dropped. The audience roared. Here is what almost nobody talks about. That improvised solution only worked because of the specific revolver sitting in Indiana Jones's holster. Not every handgun delivers the kind of immediate, unambiguous result you see on screen. The physics of that moment, one shot, one outcome, no dramatic staggering. That is not movie magic. That is the .455 Webley cartridge doing exactly what it was engineered to do in 1912. The scene works as comedy because of the contrast. Elaborate sword versus casual gunshot. Art versus pragmatism. But underneath the joke, the film is showing you something completely true about ballistics and completely true about this specific character. Indy does not fight for the spectacle of it. He fights to win and go home. And the gun in his hand was built by people who thought about violence the exact same way. Remove that revolver and replace it with something smaller. Something that looked sleeker or more heroic. And the scene loses half its weight. The laugh comes from the certainty of the outcome, and that certainty is loaded directly into the cartridge. More on that in a minute. The gun, Webley Mark VI, the revolver, Indiana Jones carries throughout Raiders of the Lost Ark as a Webley Mark VI. And if you are not immediately familiar with that name, I want you to understand what that means in the context of military firearms history. The Webley is not a cowboy gun. It is not a novelty. It is not some exotic antique somebody dug out of a museum prop room because it looked interesting on camera. The Webley Mark VI was the standard issue sidearm of the British military from 1915 through the end of World War II. Every officer who climbed out of a trench on the Western Front carried one. Every Royal Flying Corps pilot who went up in a biplane over France carried one. British forces in North Africa, in the Pacific, in every theater of the Second World War. All of them issued the same heavy, top-break, 6-shot revolver in .455 Webley. The British military does not have a reputation for choosing sidearms based on aesthetics. They choose based on what keeps soldiers alive in the worst conditions imaginable. And they chose the Webley Mark VI and kept choosing it for over 30 years. That is not an accident. That is a body of evidence. John Webley and Son started building revolvers for the British military in 1887 with the Mark I. Each subsequent version refined the action, strengthened the frame, and addressed whatever the previous model got wrong in field conditions. By the time the Mark VI arrived in 1915, the design had gone through 5 complete iterations of real-world combat feedback. The gun that emerged was not pretty. 6-inch barrel, overall length of 11¼ inches, loaded weight just over 2.5 pounds. It looked like something an engineer designed on a bad day with no time for aesthetics, which honestly is a fair description of most things that work extremely well under pressure. The frame was forged steel. The action was double action, meaning you could thumb the hammer for a precise shot or pull straight through for speed. And the top brake mechanism, the feature that made the Webley genuinely revolutionary, allowed a trained soldier to reload all 6 chambers simultaneously in under 10 seconds. We will get to that in detail because it matters more than most people realize. The Mark VI stayed in British service officially until 1945, By the time Indiana Jones is running around Cairo in 1936, the gun in his holster is 21 years old, battle-proven on 2 continents, and available on the surplus market to anyone with the money and the sense to buy one. The cartridge that changed everything. Now, we need to talk about the .455 Webley round, because this is where the Cairo scene stops being a comedy bit and starts being a physics demonstration. The .455 Webley cartridge fires a 265 grain lead bullet at approximately 650 feet per second. Those numbers are going to sound unimpressive if you compare them to modern high-velocity cartridges, and that comparison will lead you completely in the wrong direction. Stopping power is not just about speed. A small, fast bullet punches a narrow channel and keeps going. A large, slow, heavy bullet transfers its energy into the target. It does not exit cleanly and continue downrange. It delivers everything it has on impact. And 265 grains at 650 feet per second delivers roughly 250 foot-pounds of energy into whatever it hits. That is not a number. That is a description of what happens to a human body when that round connects at close range. You do not stagger. You do not keep swinging your sword. The hydrostatic shock from a projectile that wide, moving through tissue at that velocity, interrupts the central nervous system in a way that smaller rounds simply cannot guarantee. The British military tested this extensively because they were fighting in environments where a wounded enemy who kept fighting was a dead British soldier. The .455 Webley was specifically engineered so that one shot, placed anywhere in the torso, ended the engagement. Not wounded the target, ended the engagement. Think about that Cairo scene again. The swordsman is not a small man. He is putting on a legitimate display of physical ability and trained combat skill. Indiana Jones fires once. The fight ends immediately. The audience laughs because they read it as a lazy solution. The ballistics say it was the only honest solution. A .455 Webley round to center mass. At that distance does not leave room for dramatic follow-through. The scene is accurate. The audience just did not know enough to recognize it. The mechanics, why it fired so fast. The Webley Mark VI uses a top break action, and this design decision separated it from almost every other military revolver of its era in one critical way. Most revolvers, the Colt single-action Army, the Smith & Wesson contemporaries, even the early double-action design, it required you to eject spent cases one at a time. Push the ejector rod, pop one case, rotate, repeat. 6 chambers meant 6 separate ejection motions before you could begin reloading. Under fire, with your hands shaking and someone trying to kill you, that process took forever. The Webley's top break mechanism worked differently. You press the barrel latch, the entire front of the gun hinged downward at a 45-degree angle, and a star-shaped ejector plate simultaneously pushed all 6 spent cases out of the cylinder at once. Every chamber cleared in one motion. You loaded 6 fresh rounds, snapped the gun shut, and you were back in action. A trained soldier with a Webley Mark VI could go from empty to fully loaded in under 10 seconds. For comparison, a competent shooter with a Colt single-action Army needed closer to 30 seconds to perform the same reload under field conditions. 3 times slower in a gunfight, that difference is not a statistic. It is whether you survive. The top break also meant the Webley could be reloaded one-handed if necessary. Hinge it open against your hip, dump the cases, load by feel. British officers reported doing exactly this in the trenches during World War I while using their other hand to hold a torch or steady themselves against the mud. That for Indiana Jones, a man who is perpetually outnumbered, perpetually running low on good options, and perpetually operating in environments where ammunition resupply is somewhere between difficult and impossible, the Webley's reload speed was not a technical footnote, it was a survival feature. The prop department may not have thought through every detail when they put this gun in Harrison Ford's holster, but they accidentally put the right gun there. Historical accuracy. Did Indy's gun make sense? This is where I need to give the Raiders' prop department more credit than they usually receive. Because placing a Webley Mark VI in the hands of an American academic operating in 1936, Cairo is not a lazy prop decision. It is actually one of the most historically defensible firearm choices in the entire franchise. And almost nobody has ever stopped to explain why. By the mid-1930s, the Webley had been in active British military service for 20 years. The British Army was beginning its slow transition toward newer sidearms, which meant one thing for the surplus market. Webleys were flooding out of military inventories and into civilian hands at prices that made them genuinely accessible, not just in England. Everywhere Britain had a military or colonial footprint. And in 1936, that footprint covered an enormous portion of the world. Egypt was effectively under British political and military control throughout this entire period. Cairo was not some remote desert outpost cut off from the international arms trade. It was a cosmopolitan city running on European colonial infrastructure, with gun dealers who had direct pipelines to surplus British military hardware. If you knew where to look, and anyone operating professionally in that region would have known, a Webley Mark VI was not hard to find. It was not even particularly expensive. Now, put yourself in Indiana Jones's position. You are an American academic who travels regularly into politically unstable territory, frequently without institutional backup, often into situations that turn dangerous faster than any reasonable person would consider acceptable. You need a sidearm. You are not shopping for elegance. You are not shopping for something that looks good on a desk. You are shopping for something that works the first time, every time, in sand and heat and chaos, and hits hard enough that you only need to use it once. The Webley Mark VI answers every single one of those requirements. Available on the surplus market, affordable, built to military specification across 30 years of active field service, chambered in a round specifically engineered to end engagements rather than simply wound people, and mechanically robust enough that a man who probably does not spend much time on a range between semesters can pick it up, load it, and trust it completely when the moment arrives. Indiana Jones did not choose this gun because it was stylish. Nobody has ever looked at a Webley Mark VI and used the word stylish with a straight face. He chose it because it was the most practical answer available to a very serious question. The Webley is the sidearm equivalent of duct tape. Unglamorous, slightly embarrassing if someone sees it in your bag, and completely irreplaceable the moment everything around you starts falling apart. The prop department put the right gun in his holster. They may not have worked through every historical detail consciously, but the logic holds up. And in a franchise built on the idea that preparation and practicality matter more than spectacle, there is no more fitting weapon for the man carrying it. What Hollywood got wrong. And one thing it got shockingly right: the screen-used Webleyan Raiders appears slightly shortened from the standard 6-inch military specification. Now, whether that was a deliberate decision made for visual reasons, or simply a consequence of which specific variant the prop department managed to source, is genuinely unclear from any production documentation that has surfaced publicly. The Webley Mark VI was produced in several configurations across its service life, and not every example that ended up on the surplus market matched the full military spec exactly. So this may be an intentional trim, or it may just be the gun they found. Either way, a shorter barrel does real things. Muzzle velocity drops slightly because the propellant has less barrel length to fully burn through before the bullet exits. The balance shifts forward less, making the gun feel lighter in the hand than the full military version. For a single shot fired at a swordsman standing 10 feet away in a Cairo marketplace, none of that matters even slightly. But if you have spent any serious time studying the film frame by frame, and there are people who absolutely have, the discrepancy is there, and it is real. The holster is a different conversation entirely, and this is one place where the film earns genuine credit. Indy carries the Webley in a high-ride hip holster that sits close to the body and prioritizes fast access over any attempt at concealment. That configuration is period accurate in a way that a lot of Hollywood westerns and adventure films completely ignore. An American working professionally in politically unstable territory in the 1930s would not have concealed his sidearm. Concealment communicates that you are hiding something. Open carry in that environment communicated something far more useful. It communicated that you were prepared, that you had thought seriously about the possibility of violence, and that the person considering whether to start something needed to factor in the large British military revolver sitting on your hip before they made a final decision. The holster placement is not a costume choice. It is a deterrence strategy. The film got that right, but here is the detail that nobody talks about and should. The Webley Mark VI on screen is not pristine. It is not gleaming. It does not look like something a collector kept behind glass for 40 years. The finish is worn. The metal shows handling. The whole gun reads as something that has been carried regularly, gripped repeatedly, and used. That surface condition is not film aging applied by a prop department trying to make something look old. That is what a surplus British military revolver purchased secondhand in the mid-1930s actually looked like. It had already been through at minimum one war, and probably more than one set of hands before it reached whoever sold it in Cairo. A mint condition Webley would have told completely the wrong story. A worn one tells you everything you need to know before Indiana Jones fires a single round. This gun has already done what you were worried it might do, probably more than once. The real psychology of the decisive. Here is what the Cairo moment is actually communicating about Indiana Jones before the script says a single word about his character. Indy watches the sword display. He gives it approximately 2 seconds of genuine attention. Then he draws, fires, and moves on. He does not look impressed. He does not look frightened. He looks mildly inconvenienced, the way you look when a traffic light takes too long. That reaction only reads correctly because of the gun. A smaller, lighter, less authoritative sidearm, and the audience reads the scene differently. The visual weight of the Webley, its size, its heaviness, the way it fills Ford's hand, communicates that the man holding it has thought seriously about violence and arrived at a practical conclusion. He is not performing. He is solving a problem with the most efficient tool available. The laugh the audience gives is a laugh of recognition, not ridicule. Recognition of someone who has correctly identified that a sword, however impressive, is not competitive with a .455 Webley at 10 feet. The scene is funny because it is true, and it is true because the prop department, intentionally or accidentally, put the right gun in his hand. The Webley Mark VI does not say hero. It does not say adventurer. It says, I have been in enough dangerous situations to prioritize results over appearances, which is the entire Indiana Jones character philosophy summarized in one firearm choice. Legacy. And what happened mine next. Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in 1981. The Webley Mark VI appeared in Temple of Doom in 1984, and then it quietly disappeared. By The Last Crusade in 1989, the gun in Indy's holster had changed. The specific sidearm varied depending on the scene and production needs, but the Webley, that heavy practical surplus British military revolver, was gone. The character visually softened. The gun choices became less specific, less historically pointed, more generically cinematic. Whether that was a deliberate creative decision or simply a reflection of changing prop availability is unclear. But the effect on the audience is real. The Webley Mark VI carried a particular kind of weight, literal and symbolic, that its replacements never quite matched. There is a reason the Cairo scene remains the single most quoted moment in the entire franchise. Part of that is Ford's performance and Spielberg's instinct to say yes to the improvisation. But part of it is the gun. That heavy, worn, 2.5-pound British service revolver that ended an elaborate sword fight in 1 second and made an entire generation of moviegoers laugh at a truth they did not know they were being told. The greatest swordsman in Cairo never had a chance. He was not outskilled. He was not outmaneuvered. He was outgunned by a weapon with 30 years of military service history, specifically designed to produce that exact outcome. The audience thought it was a joke. The .455 Webley cartridge did not care either way. If you want the full breakdown on another iconic film weapon that rewrote what audiences believed about firearms, hit subscribe and tap the video on screen right now.